Now, I'm conscious that we're running over time, so I am going to jump on to the next speaker. Damien, have we got audio for you?
Can you hear me yet?
Yes, excellent. Okay, so we'll move on. And if anybody's got any questions for Steve, please just put them in the Q&A and he'll be able to answer them. Okay, Damien, so if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
How are we going? So,
excellent. We're still hearing you and we've got your screen.
Well, there you go. I'd love to say that it's been worth the wait, but I can't guarantee it. In the earlier theme of going back through old drives and finding data from PhD days, yeah, I've gone back and found a drive that's bigger than my head and is less than a gigabyte capacity. And magically, I've been able to drag just enough out to scrap together a talk. I'm going to go into some of the work that I did during my PhD, and also Gustav Nokier, who's pictured there in happier times and less happy times alongside. Couldn't be a Mount Isa talk without showing my favourite PhD fieldwork photo. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to go through has either come out of these theses or a field guide that we put together during the PMD CRC. And as the title suggests, 500 faults in 5 hours was ambitious, but it's a pretty messy part of the world, but certainly interesting from a mineralisation perspective. There was also the Northwest Queensland Minerals Province pack, fantastic source, and thankfully all of this was from a time pre-iPhone and early Facebook, so there's not a lot of rocks documented and not a lot of anything else documented either. So the thesis, I guess mine was looking at structural deposit scale structural controls on the inlier wide 1530 copper event. I did some mapping underground at Mammoth up at the old Gunpowder mine and tried to determine likely paleo stress during the waning stages of the Isan Orogeny. We took some of that work and forward modelled it with some stress modelling stuff. UDEC was the software, and subsequently mapped out forward modelled the Investigator fault zone, and then subsequently went out field mapped and tried to validate that. Gustav, on the other hand, took a more holistic approach to the Mount Gordon fault zone and mapped out lots of isolated transects and detailed localities away from the mine and looked at the timing and potential for reactivation of different oriented fault strands and how they related to mineralisation.
Ways of interacting during these conferences.
Oh, Gordon, you're not on mute. Oh.
There's a lot of words on this slide. Basically, just a very quick run through on the depositional history of the area. And the key takeaways, we're in the Western Fold Belt, the green schist facies, rocks, the Mount Gordon Fault Zone, which is crudely delineated here with a red line, separates the ECVs and what is known as the cover sequence 2 sediments in the east from the McNamara group, which is essentially an Isa correlative cover sequence 3 and dominated by carbonaceous and dolomitic siltstones. It's a huge age gap across it, so we're looking at a long-lived structure. The Isan Orogeny, again, a lot of words, but the take home here is that most of the action in terms of mineralisation and preconditioning of the ground, we're looking in this D3 to D4, which I note was different from the one that Pete showed. he had what we put down as a D5, a very late stage event. So we think we determined just a subtle shift in the stress field at the time of mineralisation that coincided with the first true brittle deformation in the inline. So where is it? What are we talking about with the Mount Gordon fault zone? Well, it emanates from the Mount Gordon fault, from the Mount Isa fault to the north of Mount Isa. It's possibly an extension of the Mount Isa. That's up for conjecture. It extends over 125 kilometres and it hosts significant copper mineralisation, certainly at Mount Gordon, Gunpowder, but also at Mount Oxide and the Bluff deposits. If we zoom in, these are obviously Mount Gordon in red. The rest is from the Northwest Queensland Minerals Province data pack, where there's been age dates theorised for the different orientations of faults. It's also worth noting that it's not a single strand structure that does, typically the westernmost edge of it is delineated as the Mount Gordon, although there's parallel through the area that has the Mammoth or the Gunpowder deposits down into the Investigator fault zone. The two structures seem to split but parallel and join again up towards Mount Oxide. So what is this? Like I said, it separates the McNamara group from the cover sequence 2 rocks of the Leichhardt River fault trough. It's a nice little cartoon. In reality, it looks more like this. So we can see these sediments out to the west. The greens are the ECVs. And then we've got this stratigraphic sequence of dominantly quartzites in and around the eastern strand. So this eastern strand around Investigator is known as the Stockyard Creek Fault, and up at Gunpowder is known as the Esperanza Fault. We can also see from the Mammoth or the Gunpowder deposits that there's a correlation between these transverse structures and mineralisation, and we're finding the copper mineralisation particularly close to the Mount Gordon in these cases. So here's a scrappy interp of one of the hills in the southwest. This is in an area that Gustav called Fort Binder for reasons that you'd have to ask him. But what it does show is that rather than one planar continuous fracture, we're looking at a series of shorter strike length interval interlocking fault planes, I guess. There's a complex history of reactivation across the various orientations. In the days before drones, you had to find the biggest hill in the area and climb that for a view of a bird's eye view. We can see that compared to some of the other Isan faults, that Mount Gordon fault zone is relatively recessive. It doesn't have a lot of surface exposure. It does, the second order or the transverse faults do have exposure, but that's typically because we're juxtaposing quartzites against the volcanics. So delving into Gustav's thesis a bit, and I'll try and do it justice. He did a detailed study, detailed analysis on fault timings. He did a Younging analysis. So that was based off truncations of faults, offsets of bedding markers, etc. And he determined a relative structural chronology. So he's divided the area into 4 different domains, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the areas that he mapped in detail. And the rose diagrams beneath are for all structure. And then over to this side, we can see that he's started to put those in some chronological order. And what we can see is that the last significant movement on the Mount Gordon itself was during D3. Copper, on the other hand, and the late stage deformation event was largely in the mine areas, or the areas of mineralisation. We see a dominantly strike slip event. It's largely associated with significant breccia development, particularly in the Mammoth mine underground at Gunpowder. So we can see here plenty of photos of different slicks. We did the paleo stress analysis, and lo and behold, the shortening direction was roughly east-west, but slightly southeast to west-northwest. Having a look at the prospectivity from purely from a structural orientation point of view, and which faults were favourably oriented for tensile failure versus shear failure. This doesn't take into account some of the lithological controls and the rheological controls on it. But we can straight away see that, and obviously the Mount Gordon fault zone is unfavourably oriented for significant strike slip movement during the mineralising event. What we do see is a lot of tensile failure taken up in some of these transverse structures. So if we go a step further and have a look at the relationship between the lockup structures that are locking and structures that are reactivating, we can see that we do have one instance, the Mammoth mine at Gunpowder, where we have the junction of a locked up fault with one that's likely to have re-sheared. And it's significant from the mineralisation perspective. I guess when we take that concept a step further and we have a look, Gustav's now got things painted up by reactivated and locked, and he's chucked targets based on that Mammoth analogue at some of these key intersections. Again, some of these lithological controls act as sheared margins in their own right. So you could take this map a step further and certainly build in the lithology into this targeting scenario. As it relates to Gunpowder being the biggest deposit up and down the Mount Gordon fault zone, the Esperanza fault, so we are on that eastern strand, and we can see the deposits lining up Esperanza, hosted in the shales of the Esperanza formation, all the way out to Mammoth, which is at that lockup of the Portal fault and the reactivated Mammoth fault. There's mineralisation at Mammoth North and also out at Greenstone. And these are some of the breccia textures sitting alongside. So I guess Mammoth is an interesting deposit in that it has a core of chalcopyrite grading out to a chalcocite rim. So some of the highest grade ore sits out in the margins of the ore body. And I've just chucked on one of the photos of some of the iron alteration associated. This represents a typical rock from the surface in this area. And that's worth noting that there's a distal chlorite halo to the mineralisation as well. My PhD was looking at numerical modelling. Unfortunately, this was about as good as I could drag out of my old thesis, but it does show fluid pressures required for failure in this instance, and having low fluid pressures for failure at Esperanza, correlating with the Pluto deposit over here at Mammoth and Mammoth North. So steep structures, strike slip movement is actually a decent candidate for stress mapping.
2 minutes, Damien.
No worries, we're almost there. I guess showing what some of these east-west faults look like. The Investigator fault zone, so the area that we did the mapping exercise and then we forward modelled Investigator. You can see one of the fault strands running down the side of a hill here. And then certainly in photos A, B, C and D over on the right-hand side. The bottom two photos show that real intense chlorite breccia. We think that's probably as near as what you'd see to a mammoth-style system at surface. I guess I've liked the area so much, we've finally pegged a lot of it in my new exploration company. So at some point you've got to put your money where your mouth is, and so we'll be doing some field work out there mid-year. And I guess just as a take home, the collaborative reports from those PMD-CSC days, there's some really good work done. I think it was an amazing period of collaboration. I think there should be a bit more of it myself.
Yeah.
Is that all about?
Excellent. Thanks very much, Damien. I agree. There's a huge volume of work in those PMD-CRC reports. Excellent. Thanks very much.